afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. A new season brings new exhibitions to UVM's Fleming Museum. Today we'll get an armchair tour of a number of this fall's offerings. First, we'll see some portraits with ties to a UVM alumnus. A second exhibition spotlights a famous printmaker and one-time Vermont resident. Then we'll take on a show about the sacred feminine and another that focuses on mental health. Joining me over Zoom is the Fleming Museum's assistant, Chris Dissinger. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us about these exhibits.
Thank you.
So the Fleming has been going through a reevaluation in the last few years. How do these fall exhibitions on Rockwell, Kent, and the Montier Portraits fit with the museum's effort to be anti-racist and inclusive?
Well, the museum is looking at is really taking a deep dive into all aspects of the of what we offer, both not only our exhibitions but our permanent gallery spaces, our events, our programmings, everything down to our admission fee, which we eliminated last year. To provide more equitable access. So in what used to be the European American Gallery, where I'm sitting right now, is now a space of a little bit more experimentation, a space for us to take a look at how do we want to organize a gallery in the future. This gallery was organized geographically by European and American paintings. The idea now is, can we look at other thematic organizations, like maybe portraiture through different cultures and things like that. And so very important to this process are these paintings behind my back right now, the Montier Portraits. If you walk through the remainder of our gallery, it's largely white faces looking back at you. And so this is a nice opportunity for us to feature artwork from other sources. The one thing that I find really interesting about these particular artworks is the connection to UVM and the late William Pickens, who graduated in 1958. And so the portraits actually depict Pickens' ancestors on his maternal side. And one of William Pickens' wishes, was that the paintings would be at one time on display in the museum.
And here they are. So across the fence, actually, Keith visited the gallery at right where you're sitting, where they're on display, and you served as our tour guide then and explained a little bit more about how they were unique. So we're just going to take a quick look at that video. Come back.
Okay. So the Montier portraits were painted by an unknown artist, Franklin Street, who painted these portraits of Hiram Montier and Elizabeth Montier. And what's unique about them is that they're early representations of African American sitters. They were free African American citizens. I think what makes them so moving is that idea that these were sitters that had the benefit of being able to sit for a portrait at a time when it was very unheard of. Not only that, but they also have a unique tie-in to the University of Vermont. So William Pickens, who is a alumnus of the university and was a social activist in his own right, participated also in student government and other activities like that, is actually a descendant of the one sitter, Elizabeth Montier. One of his desires prior to passing was that these portraits would be shown here on campus.
So Chris, African Americans sitting for a portrait, whether a married couple or let alone a single person prior to the Civil War, was really quite rare. What other details do we know about these portraits and how they came to be?
Well, like I say, they were painted in 1841. They were painted in Philadelphia. The artist Franklin Street, we know of no other works that he has completed. So they were painted in the Montiers were painted in their early 20s, and so these were newlywed portraits. that celebrated, they're described as pendant portraits and celebrated, commemorated their marriage. And I think one of the things, as our curator, Kristen Hansen, notes in the text that accompanies the show, that, having borne witness to nearly 2 centuries of history, the Montier portraits compel us to face our shared past from their perspective. They prompt us to reflect on the changing meaning of freedom, equality, justice, love in a multiracial democracy, and to work together now to realize a more just and equitable future that really benefits everyone. So they're really not only a look into the past, but also very much an important way for us to consider the future.
Well, they're beautiful. And let's shift our focus from art made in the 1800s to art made in the 1900s. Rockwell Kent was one of the most well-known artists of the 20th century. He was a working artist in every sense of the word. So we're going to head back to the Fleming, to the exhibition entitled Rockwell Kent, Prints from the Ralph C. Nemec Collection.
Rockwell Kent is an American artist, printmaker, author, activist. He was particularly active in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. He lived till 1971. He did work throughout his entire life, but most of the work that's featured in this exhibition is during those periods. He was ubiquitous. He did advertisements, he did book illustrations, and he was very much about the democratization of art. And so he was impassioned about making prints that could be distributed far and wide.
Kent has a very distinctive style. What makes a Rockwell Kent a Rockwell Kent?
When you look at his prints in particular, you get this sense of this sort of rugged individualism, this sort of sense of man in a harsh environment. And it wasn't necessarily man against nature, it was actually man succeeding in nature. It was this idea that man is sort of this Renaissance theme, the measure of all things. And what you see in a lot of Rockwell Kent's prints are not only this lone figure in these exotic environments, rugged mountaintop, but you also will notice that in many cases they're naked. And so that was something that he wanted to do to heighten this sense of man's capabilities and his power in the environment that he was in. In doing so, he had 2 strong values, black and white. And so this kind of heightened that sense of drama. And also the other thing you'll notice in a lot of his prints, and particularly his book illustrations, is that they have a sort of cinematic quality to them. It's almost like he was creating a storyboard for a movie, like an action film, like Beowulf in particular. You look at those prints and you can almost see him setting up the shots as they go through. But they always have this sort of same aesthetic, that this figure against or within these harsh environments. And they also sort of incorporate the sublime, this idea that the environment is not only a test of the man, but also where he belongs.
What was Kent's connection to Vermont and this region?
Kent moved to Vermont for a spell, north of Bennington, in around 1919. So this was shortly after he returned with his son from Alaska. And this is also the same time period that he started experimenting with making prints. Prior to that, he was doing mostly painting. So a lot of his printmaking sort of experiments happened during this time that he was in Vermont. In 1936, at a strike of the Vermont Marble Company, which had, I believe, sites in both Danbury and Rutland, he created the cover image of a pamphlet that was circulated to support the Vermont strikers. And if you look at that cover, you'll see it's a woman and children, and they look like they're being evicted from their company-owned housing as a result of the strike. And a lot of the prints that he produced in the 30s and into the 40s were prints that sort of celebrated the worker right. And they actually even have a sort of almost Soviet quality to them, this kind of idea of workers unite and so forth like that. You look at them, they have that sort of aesthetic that's common in Soviet era posters, yeah.
Do you have a favorite piece in the show?
I have several. One of my favorites is the Peace Homeport, which is actually located just over my shoulder here. And it's this piece that shows the sailor standing at the fore of the boat, coming into port. You can see the port in the distance there, and the sky is very dramatic. That's classic Kent, you know. And what's interesting about that particular print, it was made of a suite that was done to advertise a luxury yacht company. So once again, that tension in his work, once, you know, he's celebrating the individual and the capacity of the individual to overcome harsh environments, but he was a businessman. He knew, once again, he identified with the worker, and he knew the way of that you know, he needed to survive was to sell these things. And what was interesting about those prints is that not only were they made for the advertisement, but then they were also sold individually. So these were those prints that were sold individually.
So much going on at the Fleming Museum, and we only have about a minute left, but there's an exhibition that's beautiful in the marble court. It's called The Dark Goddess, so exploration of the sacred feminine. Quickly mention that.
Yeah, The Dark Goddess is an exhibition by Chantilly. It is on the balcony of the marble court, and it's really her exploration of gaze. You know, so much of the gaze in historic photographs has been white males looking at, you know, almost ethnographically at the subject, and here she's subverting that and changing that to the gaze of the dark goddess, and she actually uses the marble court as sort of a panopticon to look and reconsider the dark goddess, the gaze of the dark goddess.
It's beautiful. You also have another exhibit, which is called part of Call and Response, which is in collaboration with the Howard Center with artwork by their clients. It's fabulous. You have so much going on there. I want to make sure that people know that admission to the Fleming Museum remains free of charge. All the exhibitions we've talked about end on December 9th. You can find out more at uvm.edu/Fleming Museum, or you can give them a call. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope a lot of people come out because you've got so much going on there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's an exciting semester for us.
Fantastic. And thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Stay well.